In 2013, Paul Servet from Montreal, Canada, found true love online with his girlfriend, Barbara Bienvenue. Or so he thought. Shortly after, she told him she was pregnant with not one but 5 babies. When the truth came out, his entire world came crashing down.
Before we begin, make sure you smash that like button, subscribe to our channel, and click the notification bell for more amazing videos.
We've all been guilty of stretching the truth when we first met someone we are romantically attracted to. But in 2013, Paul Servet became a victim when the love of his life sold him on an elaborate story. Servet thought he had found the love of his life when he met Barbara Bienvenue online. The two of them hit it off right away, but only 2 months into the relationship, Bienvenue dropped a bombshell that ended up changing his life forever. Bienvenue told him she was pregnant, which blew Servet away. They were still in the early stages of their relationship, so having kids wasn't something that was on their minds so early on. They hadn't even moved in together or discussed marriage. Were they ready for children so soon? Despite the initial shock, Servet was a loyal and loving partner who would support his pregnant girlfriend at all costs. He was starting to get used to the idea of becoming a dad. "We were so happy," he said. But Bienvenue's pregnancy was anything but normal. The woman learned she was having more than one baby, which left Servet completely speechless. Bienvenue told her boyfriend that she was having twins, which later turned out to be false. She was in fact having triplets, or so she assumed. Then, a very confused Bienvenue learned she was having quadruplets. The number of babies kept increasing until Servet discovered the stunning news. Servet discovered that he was going to be a father of 5 and was obviously in shock at first. He knew that he and his girlfriend were nowhere near financially stable enough to feed, dress and house quintuplets. So, the couple had no choice but to ask for help, not realizing this would later backfire on poor, unsuspecting Servet. The couple asked for support from their family, friends and of course, the internet. They used a Facebook page to ask their community for donations, and it wasn't long before their cry for help was answered. But some people were having doubts about the couple. And rightly so. Furniture, clothing and diapers were just some of the items the couple received for their quintuplets. Servet and Bienvenue were incredibly touched by everyone's generosity, but some people noticed that something wasn't right with the pregnancy. A woman named Genevieve Laflamme had recently had triplets, so she took it upon herself to share a few words of wisdom with the new expectant mom. She told CTV, "I gave her tips on how to handle it, where to get financial support, where to get sponsors for diapers." But she also noticed that Bienvenue's version of events didn't add up. A week before Bienvenue's due date, she told Laflamme that the latest ultrasound had revealed she was having quintuplets. But that didn't make sense because of the way Bienvenue was moving around so easily, when she was allegedly ready to pop. The timeline of her pregnancy didn't make much sense either. A full-term pregnancy is 37 weeks. But women carrying multiple fetuses either go into labor early or are ordered by doctors to stay in bed months before their due date. And as it turns out, Laflamme had every right to be skeptical. Bienvenue went into labor during her 34th week, so Servet excitedly rushed his girlfriend to the hospital. They had already picked out 4 of the children's names: Alexander, Sebastian, Charles and Rosalie. But then Servet got the worst news any father could get from doctors. Servet couldn't understand what the medical staff was trying to tell him at first. He assumed that Bienvenue had lost the babies. But the doctors were quite thorough in their examination and discovered that there were no fetuses growing in her womb. Servet couldn't understand how this could have ever happened. He had been by his girlfriend's side the whole time and was baffled by the heartbreaking news. "The doctors told me it was a phantom pregnancy," Servet told the Daily Mail. But the medical staff had even more shocking revelations to share with Servet that left him confused and devastated. The hospital had no records of Bienvenue ever having been there for a checkup. And a nurse showed Servet the test results from her blood work, which showed that Bienvenue had never been pregnant, either. Much to his horror, his girlfriend had seemingly been lying all along. But there was a reason she was able to fool him for all these months. Bienvenue had all the symptoms of a pregnant woman, like morning sickness and a swollen abdomen, but the pregnancy was all in her head. So, once the truth came to light, she was psychologically evaluated for pseudocyesis, the clinical term for phantom pregnancy. But Servet was the one who ended up needing help. There was another victim here, and that was Servet, who was emotionally destroyed by Bienvenue's deception. "I lost everything, it was my whole life," he told the QMI agency. But he wasn't the only one who had to deal with the heartbreak. "We were so happy," Servet told the QMI agency. Even my parents, they were so looking forward to having grandchildren. But aside from dealing with the harsh truth, Servet also had to deal with the aftermath of Bienvenue's alleged phantom pregnancy. I'll return all these things to people who sent them or give them away. Servet told the QMI agency. I'm a good person and I have nothing to do with these lies. But would he face legal charges for the alleged deception? The spouse, who was also jilted with this whole story, has been reimbursing some of the associations, local police spokesperson Sergeant Luke Tugas told abcnews.com. The officer was happy to report that his department hadn't received any fraud complaints from the people who donated money and baby items to the couple. Sadly, this wasn't the first time Bienvenue had lied this way. An unnamed relative from Bienvenue's side of the family claimed she once told people she had leukemia when she didn't. And another ex-boyfriend from her past claimed she had told him they were having twins when they weren't. Unsurprisingly, Bienvenue had also cut ties with her friends and family before she put on this ruse. According to the QMI agency, Bienvenue's family and friends weren't shocked by what she had done. She had reportedly severed ties with the ones she loved because she didn't want anyone to know what she was up to. But the reason why she did what she did was still unclear. The cause of pseudocyesis isn't entirely clear, but according to AmericanPregnancy.org, it may be the result of physical or mental trauma, as well as a chemical balance in the brain. It may also be caused as a result of fertility issues or childbirth-related complications. Some women might experience pseudocyesis after having a miscarriage or if they are having issues conceiving because of infertility. Women entering menopause have also been known to exhibit the same symptoms. But whatever became of Servet and Bienvenue was provided psychological support to recover. Although she and Servet have remained out of the spotlight since the incident, we hope that they've found peace and happiness on their own. If you enjoyed this story, wait for our next story starting in 10 seconds. Fast forward to today, 50 years later, and something miraculous has brought them back together. This time, things would be much different. The newspaper clippings made it so. Lovebirds from the very beginning, these two found love at first sight. They became engaged while they were still in college and only saw a bright future ahead. Unfortunately, time was not on their side and tragedy struck. Due to unforeseen circumstances, the two lovers were forced to call their engagement quits. The two met while attending Occidental College in Los Angeles, California. They met and fell in love immediately. It was a true love story. Boy meets girl, girl meets boy, and they end up in a castle somewhere living happily ever after. At least that's what was supposed to happen. They fell in love with each other at first sight. They got engaged a few months later. Janice Rood and Prentice Wilson pictured their lives together. That was all that mattered to them. Unfortunately, not everyone felt the same about their relationship. While the two were a beautiful couple, they were still in college. They were still earning their degrees. To some people, now just wasn't the time to get married. The way we date now is very different than it was 50 years ago. There is so much technology at our disposal. The awkwardness of talking to someone you like face to face is dulled by texting before even meeting. Something else that was different 50 years ago is the influence parents had on relationships. There was a deciding vote parents had on their child's significant other that just doesn't exist in the same way today. Sometimes parental input isn't always good for the relationship. Just ask Janice Rood and Prentice Wilson. Janice Rood was a sophomore when she and Wilson met. She was going to Occidental College to earn a degree in biology. It was something she was determined to do. Her father instilled a belief in her that in order to achieve great things in this world, you have to work hard. That's what Rood was doing. She was working hard to earn a degree in order to be successful in life. There was no way of her knowing that her ambitions would be her undoing. She came from a humble life in Reno, Nevada. She might not have had all of the funds she needed to pay for college, but that's what work-study was for. Prentice Wilson was merely a freshman when he met Janice Rood. He was still getting his feet wet in the college life. Earning a degree in law, Wilson had a plan of his life in college mapped out. Nowhere in there did he prepare to fall in love with a young woman who worked in the cafeteria. Wilson was from less humble beginnings. His family resided in Santa Maria, California and had high expectations of their son. It was only natural that he join a fraternity, Kappa Sigma, at Occidental College and eventually become president of it. During his time as president of Kappa Sigma, Prentice Wilson made waves at the Occidental College campus. One wave in particular was when a black student, Greg Gigsby, wanted to join the National Fraternity Union and was denied solely based on the color of his skin. Unable to accept such blatant racism, Wilson fought for Kappa Sigma to quit the National Fraternity Union and become an independent chapter, which they did. Greg Gigsby was allowed into Kappa Sigma shortly after. Although the two hadn't formally met yet, Wilson had noticed Rude during her shifts before. He noticed how early she had to wake up in order to get to her shift. Soon he was waking up just as early in order to be the first one in the cafeteria. All he wanted was to see Rude. Rude only worked in the cafeteria because she needed to make ends meet to pay her tuition. While her father paid for part of her tuition, there was another part of her tuition that still needed to be paid for. To pay for the rest, she picked up shifts in the cafeteria. When Prentice Wilson started to be the first person in the cafeteria for days at a time, Janice Rude began to take notice. She didn't mind a bit. The two couldn't keep their eyes off of each other. This is what you could deem as love at first sight. This continued for weeks. Neither of them spoke more than a few words to each other during this time. Surprisingly, none of those words included their names. Despite their obvious attraction to one another, neither of them could ask each other's names. Little did they know that their encounters were incredibly memorable for both of them. It got to the point where if Wilson didn't show up first in her line one morning, Rude would worry that something awful had happened to him. That's how routine their encounter had become. The two looked forward to it every morning. 3.5 weeks after their first meeting, Wilson finally learned her name, Janice Rude. It was a name that he would surely never forget, and when she finally learned his name, it was one she had already heard in the news. Wilson's spout with racism and fraternities really had made a wave in the college community. Thanksgiving rolled around on the Occidental College campus and Rude was excited. The college held a Thanksgiving dinner before the students were given the time off to go home and celebrate with their families. It was meant to be an opportunity for the students to get to know each other. Although she still worked the dinner, she was excited to see her favorite person in her line for this special dinner. Unfortunately, this time was different. Wilson never showed up for dinner. Worried, Rude did her best to figure out what could be wrong with her cafeteria crush. Rude found one of his friends and found out that he had traveled home early to celebrate Thanksgiving with his family. Without a thought, she mapped out the 3-hour drive to Santa Maria and decided to visit him at his home. She wanted to see him and no amount of distance or fear was going to stop her. It's a good thing, too, because Wilson was delighted to see her standing on his front porch. Of course, he was shocked that she had driven this far to see him, but he was delighted nonetheless. It seems they were both missing their incidental meetups in the cafeteria. Wilson's family welcomed Rude in with open arms, even inviting her to stay for Thanksgiving dinner. That Thanksgiving dinner was a turning point in their relationship. They were no longer cafeteria crushes who shared small talk in the cafeteria line every morning. No, everything about the nature of their interactions changed the moment they reunited on campus after Thanksgiving. An actual relationship was finally budding. The two were inseparable. Everyone around them could feel how much they enjoyed each other's company. It was obvious. They were meant to be together. Wilson knew it, too. He proposed to Rude after only a few short months of knowing her. They both couldn't have been happier. But this happiness would only last a short time. Word spread fast, and their engagement was announced in the local newspaper. Everyone was excited for them, except for Janice Rude's father. He didn't like the idea of his daughter marrying so young and while she was still earning her degree. Because he disapproved, he gave her an ultimatum: receive his financial support to carry out her degree or get married to Wilson. Rude's father put her between a rock and a hard place. She loved both so much. She had to choose between finishing her education and reaping the rewards of all her hard work or marrying the love of her life and spending the rest of her life with Wilson. Even with the help of Rude's mother, the financial burden of her education was still heavy. In the end, she chose to break off the engagement to Wilson. After the engagement was called off, the two started drifting apart in the world. Janice Rude went on to finish her degree in biology and ended up running the family's diving board business. The business was so successful, she earned herself a Hall of Fame award. Prentice Wilson completed his law degree and became a very successful tax attorney. They both eventually married different people and lived very different lives. Though their paths rarely ever crossed, they remained cordial with each other when they did happen to bump into one another. Their engagement seemed like a dream in a lifetime ago. 47 years passed, and both of them were divorced around the same time. They suffered the same tragedy of their mother's deaths around the same time. They had so much in common nearly 50 years later. It was as if the universe was calling them back to each other. Little to their knowledge, Both of their mothers kept their own copy of that newspaper clipping of their engagement. Wilson's mother went so far as to laminate it and keep it in her wallet. Their mothers knew the entire time that they were meant to be together. And now they knew it, too. After finding the newspaper clipping individually while going through their mother's belongings, they decided to reach out to one another. They had their first date in 50 years at the Cliff House restaurant in San Francisco. Rude and Wilson owed it to themselves to determine whether the spark was still there. The spark never left. They felt it the moment they saw each other again, even after all this time. From there, they picked up right where they left off. The couple dated for 6 months before becoming engaged for the second time. This time, their engagement stuck. They were married on August 19, 2012 at the very place they fell in love, Occidental College. They celebrated their love surrounded by old classmates and family. The perfect ending to their love story 17,500 days later.